tardes a todos. Muchas gracias por estar aquí. En nombre de Roca Editorial os agradezco que hayáis venido y también le doy las gracias a Patricia, que nos ha ayudado a traer a Neil aquí, y al British Council, por supuesto. Sois todos fans, estoy segura, así que no hace falta que os haga muchas presentaciones de quién es Neil. Solamente un recordatorio: nació en 1960 en Portchester, en el Reino Unido. Es autor de una de las series más celebradas, más conocidas, más admiradas y de culto que existe de cómic, que es Sandman, como bien sabéis. Y aparte de eso, es autor de múltiples libros para jóvenes y para adultos, entre los que se encuentran los dos últimos que hemos publicado nosotros, que se llaman El océano al final del camino y El galáctico, pirático y alienígena viaje de mi padre, aunque ya sé que algunos tenéis quejas con este título, pero tengo que decir que él estuvo de acuerdo. Ha ganado premios como el Hugo, el Nebula, el Bram Stoker, las medallas Newbery y Carnegie, o sea, es laureado en todos los ámbitos, y además es autor de guiones de cine para sus propias películas y varios otros trabajos de los que nos hablará esta tarde. Con él hemos vibrado, hemos sonreído, hemos soñado y hemos tenido muchas pesadillas, sobre todo. Y por fin hemos vuelto a traerle para que nos hable de todo ello. Así que recibamos con un fuerte aplauso a Neil Gaiman. Sit. Después de esta breve introducción, ahora ya cambio a inglés para facilitarle más la tarea a los traductores que están ayudándonos esta tarde. Neil, welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for joining us and for coming to Barcelona again after such a long time. As you can see, there was plenty of people waiting for you, and we're very glad to have you here.
I hope they haven't all been waiting 11 years. Checking their watches.
Exactly. So you are busy enough. We know about you from your many tweets and posts and everything all the information that we can gather about you. It's always interesting. You travel all the time, you do performances, you do charity readings, you do media events, commencement speeches. My question is, how do you get to do that, all of that?
Very, very badly. I used to be pretty good at it. I used to somehow balance all of the other stuff and the work. Now, what I do is I give the impression that I'm everywhere doing everything, but actually I'm not. What I do is I'll take 4 months and do nothing but write in it, for example. And nobody really notices that I'm not tweeting or I've disappeared.
I beg to disagree with that.
Well, okay. Few people might have noticed a little bit. But I went off and I wrote. And then I have 3 weeks where I got to go to Jordan, to Syrian refugee camps for the United Nations. I flew from Jordan to London, landed at Heathrow, jumped on the Heathrow Express, took the taxi from Paddington to the British Library, was interviewed for a documentary the BBC are doing about Kate Bush, went on stage with Tori Amos, talked for 90 minutes, ran across to the other building and did a reading. And then went off to Finland, not to Finland, to Norway and to Sweden, and then came here. So it's all very compressed. I'm doing all the mad stuff now in one big box. And
you have problems saying no?
Maybe.
Good to hear.
I mean, I came to Spain because you asked me.
Yeah, I've been asking you for the last 10 years, so yeah, about time, you know.
But I only came because she was my publicist 11 years ago. And I was here to promote Coraline. And Patricia was a very good publicist, but her heart was not in publicisting. She was not. She kept talking about books in a way that implied she was actually really interested in the writing and the process and the editing. So when I said goodbye, I told her that she should become an editor. And that is obviously why she's an editor. She listened to me 11 years ago.
That's absolutely the only reason, of course. Let's talk about books then. So, seeing that I'm so good at it, let's talk about your books. It was during a trip that Amanda, your wife, took to Australia that you started writing The Ocean. Can you tell us a little bit how that process was?
Yes. So my wife is a musician. And she went to Melbourne, Australia to make a record because it was winter in America. And she likes the heat, and she likes Australians. And she wanted to go somewhere that nobody could bother her to make a record. So I came back. I went out to Australia with her briefly, and then I came back and I started writing. I was meant to be working on, I think, a Doctor Who episode and several other things. But I kept finding that I missed my wife. And although we had been together for 3 years, I had never encountered Amanda making a record before, which is every bit as bad as me writing a book for the amount of attention you pay to anybody else in the world. So I was in Florida going, hello, I'm here, love me. And she was in Australia going, hi, my record's going fine. And I thought I should do something. I thought I'll give her a present. I will write her a short story. And a short story, and I'll put things that she likes in it. She likes honesty. She likes emotion. She likes me. And I will try and be honest and emotional. And I will write her a short story that will tell her about what it was like being me when I was 7 years old. The family won't be my family, but the location will be my location. The things that will happen will be fictional, but the eyes the character will look out of will be my eyes. And it will be a short story. So I started to write the short story. After a few weeks, I thought, okay, it's a novelette. After another week, I thought it's a novella. And by the time I finished it, she'd come back from Australia and was mixing her album in Dallas. And I flew out to Dallas, and I was typing it up. And every morning, every night, I would read her what I had written, what I'd typed up that day. And she would always fall asleep because she was very jet-lagged. And I never took it personally.
Good for you.
When she woke up the next morning, I would say, what do you remember? She'd tell me the last thing she remembered, and I would read her the rest of the chapter. And I finished it, and I did a word count, and I sent an email to my editors in England and in America. And I said, I appear to have accidentally written a novel. I'm very sorry. I know you're not expecting it. I hope it doesn't mess up your day, but here's a novel. And they went, no, it's good. So that was how my novel got written. It got written because I missed her. It got written because I wanted to give her something. And it got written because I thought it would be interesting.
Do you think it was written now because it was the right time to write it? I mean, from your point of view, from your age now, you could look back and try and recreate, through a 7-year-old eyes, a life of nightmare turned into fantasy, fueled by necessity, for the...
I don't know that I could have written it when I was younger. Although what's strange for me sometimes is people who say, well, this is very, very different from anything else you've done. And I have to say, well, it's absolutely not. It's just different to the novels. The first book I did was a graphic novel. The first fiction book was a graphic novel called Violent Cases. And Violent Cases was absolutely it was the same kind of creature. It was a memoir about being 3 years old. And in which I sort of mixed up me and my 3-year-old memories with Chicago gangland killings in the 1930s, which all began when my father told me as an adult that the osteopath who had fixed my arm when my father had accidentally dislocated my shoulder when I was a little child had been Al Capone's osteopath.
Oh, God.
And I thought, oh, that's a story. And the same happened a few years later when I did a book called Mr. Punch, which was about Punch and Judy puppetry and about my family. And mixed true things and lies. So when I came to write The Ocean at the End of the Lane, I had the toolkit. I knew how to build this thing. I knew a way of writing that allowed me to take true things, but not to be bound by them. It's as if I was building a mosaic picture in which every little red square is the truth, but the red squares are not the picture, and they're surrounded by brown and by blue and by white and by black, and they're all lies. I have 2 sisters, and one of my sisters loved the book. The hero in this book, the protagonist, only has one sister. One of my sisters loved it, although, and she took joy in going, oh, you've moved this farm, and you've changed this around, and you moved this, and all of that kind of thing. And one of my sisters was absolutely upset by it. And she was like, but it didn't happen. And I'm saying, well, no, it's fictional. She's saying, but it's filled with lies. I'm saying, well, yes, it's fictional. People will think I said that. Nobody will think you said that. They will think I said that thing about our father. Our father was not having an affair with an extra-dimensional creature. So
yeah.
She's come to live with it now, but she found it very, very hard to get her head around.
It does make you very curious about what part of that is autobiographical or what part of the book is not. I mean, I assume Ursula is not, but you never know with you.
You don't. She's not. But the thing about the book is there's almost nothing that is actually true. But there's lots and lots of little things that I've grabbed and moved and borrowed and changed and used for my own purposes.
Right.
So I'm sort of... But having said that, there was the narrator, especially the narrator, not so much the narrator in the framing sequence, who's a kind of alternate universe version of me. Mm-hmm. But the 7-year-old is absolutely looking out of my eyes. When I was 7, if my family went to some kind of event, a wedding, or some kind of, just going to see another branch of the family in London or something like that, after I got out of the car, my father would pat me down to find the books. And he would take them away from me and lock them in the car, which was always pointless because wherever we were going, I would always find a book. And, I would just go and quietly sit behind a sofa or under a table, and I would read.
Boy after my own heart. Let's move on to a different book because we have a lot of things to talk about. So we also have here, Fortunately the Milk, of the unfortunate title in Spanish, I must say, to all his fans here gathered. This is a completely...
So the title here is a galactic piratical alien voyage with my father.
Yeah.
Of my father.
Yeah, with the of my father.
Yep.
Okay.
Spoilers.
Oh, come on, man. Thank you very much. That's going to be so much fun in my timeline now. Anyway, this is a completely different book. You were writing at the same time as The Ocean at the End of the Lane.
Yeah.
Again, how?
So pretty much all of my children's books started with, at one time or another, one of my children. And my children are now grown up, but Coraline started with my daughter Holly, who would be 4 years old and would come home from school and would tell me scary stories. She'd make me write them down about little girls, normally called Holly, who would come home from kindergarten and their mothers would be waiting for them in the kitchen, but they were not their mothers. They were witches pretending to be their mothers, who would then lock them in the basement with the dead children. And then the dead children and the little girl called Holly would escape, and the witches would come after them. And I thought these stories were great. So I thought, I'll write one for Holly. Actually, first of all, I went down to my local bookshop and I said, what have you got in the way of really good horror for like 4 or 5-year-olds? Then, when they gave me that look, I went off to write Caroline. So this book actually began with another book. It began with a book called The Day I Swapped My Dad for 2 Goldfish, which began with my son Mike, who was about 4 or 5 years old. And I just told him, I think, to go to bed, because it was his bedtime. And he was really angry at this. He looked up at me, and he said, oh, I wish I didn't have a dad. I wish I had. And then you could see him have to stop. What else can you have? There's fathers, and he said, I wish I had goldfish. And he went off to bed. And I thought, that's brilliant, I'm stealing that. So I wrote a book called The Day I Swapped My Dad for 2 Goldfish, and in it, there is a father who is reading the newspaper, doesn't even notice when his son swaps him for 2 goldfish, And then other kids swap him because they think he's really boring. So he gets swapped for an electric guitar and a gorilla mask and a rabbit. And as time has gone on, because that was my first children's book to be published in 1998. And as time has gone on, I have felt more and more guilty about that book, especially when people come to me and they tell me they were given it as a Father's Day present. So I thought, okay, I am going to make it up for fathers. Because I started thinking about, well, where are the good children's books with fathers as heroes? I thought there aren't any. Mothers sometimes, they do okay. They're loving. They're wonderful. Fathers, if you're lucky, they get killed at the beginning of the book. They just disappear off. So I thought, I'll have a dad in a book. But the trouble is, the moment you decide to put a dad in the book, you go, well, actually, the only person who thinks that a father should be center stage in a book is a father. They're the only people who actually think that fathers are heroes. Everybody else is going, no, we want to kill you off on page 1. So it became in my head a story that a father had to tell about why he was so incredibly late bringing back the milk for his children's cereal from the shop. And now everybody knows what happens. Although you have not mentioned the vampires on the cover, so we're good for that. Or the ponies.
Hey, I can just, take the illustration off in the next edition, and then make it longer. So don't dare me. Anyway.
So yeah, it was very weird because I was writing 2 books at some points at the same time. And one of them was the darkest, most personal, most serious book that I'd ever written. And it was narrated by an adult, but the point of view was that of a child.
Again.
And then I was writing the silliest, goofiest, genuinely funniest book I'd ever written, in a framing sequence being told by a child, with the narrative being told by an adult. And it was like these 2 books were these peculiar, distorted mirror images of each other. Each book was something the other one wasn't. And I wrote, fortunately, the milk in a very strange way. Because I would just write it. I'm always somebody who tells people, do not just write when you're inspired. It's a very bad way to write. If you're going to write, just write. Write every day. Do your words. And that's completely true. And that's how I wrote, Ocean at the End of the Lane. I just wrote every day. Fortunately, the milk, I just wrote when I felt like it. I had a notebook, which was exactly like this one, only it was black. In that pocket, which is specially made to fit one of those notebooks. And I would pull it out on planes and on trains, and just whenever I had some time, or if I felt depressed, if I was a little bit sad, I would write a few pages of Fortune of the Milk until I was laughing. Because there's nothing like a stegosaurus, time-traveling stegosaurus in a hot air balloon for cheering you up.
Yeah. This is very interesting, the way you talk about adults and children. And this brings me to probably my favorite quote in the ocean, which says, I was going to read it, but I'm going to ask you to read it, right? It's
sure.
Just this tiny bit here.
Why do you think she's scared of anything? She's a grown-up, isn't she? Grown-ups and monsters aren't scared of things. Oh, monsters are scared, said Letty. I am going to tell you something important. Grown-ups don't look like grown-ups on the inside either. Outside, they're big and thoughtless, and they always know what they're doing. Inside, they look just like they always have, like they did when they were your age. The truth is, there aren't any grown-ups, not in the whole wide world. Except for Granny, of course.
So it's good to know that the politics of the world they are in the hands of 7-year-olds, because inside...
I think that actually explains an awful lot.
Yes.
You can't have my toys. This is mine. And somebody's going, you guys could just share mine. That is not the behavior of an adult. That is the behavior of a 7-year-old.
Brawling children throwing a tantrum, that's what they are, really.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely something that I believe, partly just because I was quite sure when I was a kid that one day, I didn't know quite when it would happen, maybe when I was 16, maybe when I was 20, maybe when I was 30. But one day, they'd take me out somewhere, and they'd come and they'd knock on the door and they'd say, okay, it's time. And I would follow them. And then they'd give me the rule book, which would tell me all the adult stuff, the book of adults. and I would read that, and then they would, anoint me. And suddenly my identity would drop away, and I would become a proper adult who knew what was going on and was an adult. And I kept waiting. And now I'm 53 and my beard is white. And those fuckers haven't come. And I'm going, okay, they will never come. I'm now old enough to know that everybody, no matter how bald, how wizened, how white your beard, everybody, we are, at best, 11-year-olds in drag.
Yes, indeed. I was talking about politics, a little bit, and I'd like to take the opportunity to ask you about your very recent trip to Syria. Jordan, sorry.
I didn't go to Syria, which is probably a good thing.
Yeah,
especially
sorry
if you want
that.
me here. No, actually, I wasn't even allowed to go to the border. Originally, I went to Jordan under the auspices of the United Nations Refugee Agency, the UNHCR. And originally, they planned for me to spend half a day or perhaps a night up on the border. And then the border zone, which had been safe for the previous 6 months, suddenly became unsafe. And people were bombing and shooting, and it got very, very nasty. Which also got really hard for the people who were coming across the border. So, yes, okay. So around 18 months ago, I was approached by BlackBerry, and they said, we're finally bringing out a smartphone, and we'd love it if you would do some kind of project using social media. Anything you want to do, we will be your patron. And I said, okay, well, I've always wanted to do this thing where I tweet the idea, I tweet about the months of the year, take what comes back, write 12 short stories. I'll ask, why is January dangerous? What's the strangest thing you've ever seen in July? What would you like to burn in November? And I'll take the replies and I'll build short stories. And then I'll send the short stories out and people can make art around the short stories. So we'll really have fun. And they said, great, go for it. So I did this. And it went huge on the web. The The hashtags on the questions became giant worldwide trending hashtags, and the project was followed by millions of people. And the sister of one of the people in the advertising agency worked for the United Nations. And he basically came home and said, "You won't believe what's happening here on social media." So she approached me and said, "Look, I know this stuff is amazing. Could you do something for World Refugee Day? Would you just say something and maybe put up some tweets?" So I said, "Of course." And a few months later, they got back in touch and they said, we can track where things come from. And we're getting more attention from the stuff that you've done than from anything else. And more eyes and more people are actually donating and getting involved. Would you like to do more with us? And I said, "Yeah, of course." So I thought, well, I have a megaphone. I have a place to stand, and people are listening to me. Why not use it for good? So they asked if I would like to go out to a refugee camp. And I said, sure. And we didn't really know if it was going to be Africa or Syria, and the Syrian camps. And they said, actually, a few months ago, they said, let's do Jordan. So I went out to Jordan, and I did not know what to expect. And it wasn't that I hadn't read up on it. It was that it actually was too big to fit in my head what was going on. Because once you get into the realm of big numbers, they don't mean anything. 2.5 million people have fled Syria since the start of the conflict. 600,000 people are in Jordan. The population of Jordan is 6 million. 10%. And 500,000 people of those have actually gone into the cities, but they ran out. They couldn't keep putting people in the cities. So the Jordanians said, build a camp. And they built a camp. They had 2 weeks to build a camp. And the first camp they built, Zatri camp, now contains 100,000 people. That's a city. And it's a city in which people are incredibly inventive and entrepreneurial and smart, and they love bucking the system. Every street light is covered with a spaghetti tangle of wires where they're stealing electricity. So the camp electricity bill is now $500,000 a month because the street lamps are running everything. And when you have 100,000 people, your life kind of returns to some kind of weird normal, except it's not normal. People are still getting married. There are shops in the camp where you can rent wedding dresses. Nobody's rich enough to afford a wedding dress, but you can rent a wedding dress. They do make you buy the wedding night lingerie.
Well, they should, actually.
But so I went out to the camps. I was there from dawn, where they hand out the bread, 4 pieces of pita bread to everybody in the camp. 400,000 pieces of pita bread go out. I started talking to the people. The next day I went out to Azraq camp, which is the new camp. They've now closed down Zatri for anyone except people with relatives in there, and started a new camp which will fit 130,000 people. Again, it's out in the desert. And I followed refugees who had just arrived that night through the arrival process. And what I started to discover was that everybody there had gone through hell. And it wasn't just one version of hell, it was a lot of versions of hell. Because the first version of hell they went through was whatever made them decide that they had to leave Syria. And one of the things he discovered about Syrians is they love Syria. They don't want to go to Jordan. It's this dry, small, boring place, and it's the fourth driest country in the world, and Syria is great. They like Syria. So, but there comes a point where, you know, your 4 members of your family have disappeared, and you've been beaten up too many times, and they've turned off the water, and there's no food, and you can't feed your kids. And because this war is going on, the farmers aren't out in their fields, so no food is getting produced. And now your sheikhs, your religious leaders, have given you permission to eat cats and dogs because that's all there is. And you're making soup out of grass and the leaves of trees to try and feed your children. And now there's no water at all. So you're going down to the swamp and you're collecting swamp water and you're letting it sit so that the muck goes down to the bottom, and you're drinking it, and you know that this is going to make you really ill, but you also know that the alternative is to die of thirst. And you're not a primitive person. You were a car salesman. You had a car showroom or a factory, or you sold insurance, or you were a designer, or you worked on the web. You worked in, you owned a little shoe factory. These are people with real lives, real jobs. And now they're in this world in which things are just too dangerous to stay. And they decide to leave. And leaving in itself is another journey through hell. Because nobody makes it easy for you. You have to bribe people now at the checkpoints. If you don't bribe them at the checkpoints, they beat you up. And they beat you up like jumping on you and kicking you in front of your wives and children until you can't move, and then they send you away. People are selling everything they own, any furniture, any possessions. They're borrowing everything in order to bribe people to smuggle them out of the country. And some of them are going to be walking for 4 or 5 days across the desert at the end of the smuggling process. And they're passing the dead bodies of people betrayed by smugglers or shot. And I went into it feeling kind of, I don't know, naive, but very, very political and earnest. And the politics thing, I thought, when people would tell me things, somebody would tell me how he'd gone down to the hospital to collect some medicine for his wife on his motorbike, and he looked out of the window of the hospital up on the 4th floor, and he saw some bombing had started, and he saw his house was bombed, and he knew his children were in the basement. So he had to head back to dig his children out. And he got onto his motorbike, and he was driving back, and a trainee sniper, just practicing, shot him in the back. So he fell off his bike and was taken back to the hospital, where he was paralyzed for 4 months. Or somebody else telling me about how their nephew was meant to be having open heart surgery, and their 2 brothers went to get their blood drained, take some blood for a transfusion so the kid could have blood during the heart operation. And they got stopped at a checkpoint. And they phoned on their mobile phone saying, hey, we're stopped at a checkpoint, we may be a little late. And they were never seen again. But there was one cousin who was with them, and they were telling me there was a show on the nightly news where they would show, on the local news, where they'd show bodies found that day, the faces of bodies, just for people to identify, because they never knew who was killed, and they saw their cousin's severed head on the news.
That's horrible.
And so I would say to them, well, so who did this? Was it the rebels? Was it the government? Was it who was it? Who shot you? Who bombed your house? Who disappeared? Who ran that checkpoint? Who did it? And the answer that I kept hearing over and over again is, we don't know. And I realized that actually I was almost, in some ways, naive going in with a political point of view, going there are good guys, there are bad guys. After a while, I started going, actually, there are two sides. There are the people who want to raise their children, the people who want to get on with their lives, and there are the people shooting at them. And those are the two sides, and I am on the side of the people who want to get on with raising their children.
Right. Congratulations on trying to raise awareness on this very awful matter. Compared to what you just told us, your monsters pale. They're nothing but kittens, let's say. But that's something that you actually do a lot in your work, I think. The monsters are, they're supposed to be scary, they're supposed to be horrible, but then you find out that the chilling qualities, the really bad ones, belong to the human characters in your books. Like happens, for example, in the Graveyard book, where the ghosts are the ones that take care of Bod, whereas, there's a killer on the loose trying to just get to him. There's another story that has very scary characters, I think, changing the subject completely. But you are very proud of what they did to it. It's the BBC's radio version of Neverwhere,
yes,
with all these people. So I thought it would be nice to hear just a tiny bit for you all to enjoy.
Come in, Richard Mayhew. Come in. Dear me, you do look a mess. Please, I think we all know each other. You know the Lady Door, of course.
Door, are you all right?
Run, Richard!
My associates, Mr. Croup, Mr. Vandermark.
Associates?
You will excuse us sneaking up, Mr. Vandermark.
Wouldn't want him to miss this, Mr. Crew.
Was Hunter working for you too?
Hunter worked for herself. Where is she?
Dead.
No!
Poor dear.
Door, are you all right?
More or less, so far.
I'm afraid the Lady Door was proving a little intransigent. I was just pondering having Mr. Croup and Mr. Vandermark.
Talk to her.
You leave her alone!
We have formed an attachment, have we? Useful, the lady might cooperate in order to end the pain and suffering of a fellow mortal. Especially yourself, Richard. Mr. Croup.
Yes, sir. Now, Mr. Vandermark, if you'll do the honours, any finger will do.
Pinky.
No. Yeah.
Poor Richard. Were you were you involved in the script writing of the?
I got to read the scripts as Dirk, who wrote them. Dirk Maggs would send them over to me, and would change things a little, but mostly I just thought they were great. And then we got the most wonderful cast. And we got the wonderful cast because we have fans out there, and there are Neverwhere fans.
Oh, yeah.
James McAvoy said yes because he's a huge Neverwhere fan. Once James McAvoy said yes, everybody else said yes. Christopher Lee said yes, Bernard Cribbin said yes, Anthony Stewart Head said yes. And of course, very, very rapidly, and to everyone's delight and astonishment, Benedict Cumberbatch said yes. So, and it's funny, we were actually was it December?
December, yeah.
We were in London at a charity event. I went to read letters and to auction stuff with various people, Gillian Anderson and Nick Cave. And Benedict Cumberbatch was there. And he had just flown in from the Hobbit premieres. And we'd never met. I'm actually in this production of Neverwhere in 2 different parts, but I recorded my stuff 6 weeks before everybody else because of having to be in the wrong place at the wrong time. So I missed the actual table reading and I missed the recording, but I am in there. So in my head, I thought, here we have Benedict Cumberbatch, currently probably about the hottest actor on the planet. So I thought I will play it very cool. And sort of, he's backstage, and sort of, hello, I'm Neil Gaiman. And he's like, oh, yes, I was in your... I said, yes, you were Islington in Neverwhere. He said, yes. And he's talking to Gillian Anderson. I go away. And I had failed to understand that even the hottest actor in the world is an actor. Which means that when I ran into him in the intermission backstage, he's like, Neil, so you did actually listen to Neverwhere. And I'm like, yes. He said, what, was it? I said, you were really good. He said, oh, good. So, yes. I forgot the thing about actors is you have to tell them they were wonderful, and then everything's okay. And he had been absolutely terrified for the previous 45 minutes that I'd hated it, which I thought was funny and sweet.
And then the whole situations with the DNA in the books and
yes.
ensured.
Well, we were auctioning books and trying to get the prices of these books up. And it was me and Gillian Anderson were auctioning, and I had this idea that we'd get Nick Cave and Benedict Cumberbatch to be our book models. They would come out onto the stage holding the book. And I'm trying to get the price up. And I pointed out that Benedict Cumberbatch had actually held this book, which meant that his sweat was there. At which point he licked it. And I said, right now, any of you with a small laboratory can isolate the DNA and grow your own Benedict Cumberbatch. At which point it went for a lot of money.
£5,000, actually.
Yes.
I remember £5,430 or something like that. So it was quite impressive. We're running out of time. But we did this thing in which we asked people in Twitter to send us questions for you. So I'm going to read one of them, and then I'm going to yield the floor. One question, I'm sorry. Because then I suppose you all want your book signed, and we need to give this man some time, to actually just calm down, come back, sign your books, and then go. So the question that we selected from the Twitter timeline is, they always ask you questions about people that are starting to write, questions, pieces of advice to people that you can give to people that are starting to write. What is what you wouldn't advise to those people?
What wouldn't I tell anybody who was starting to write? Okay, well, these are the things that I would never say to somebody who came to me and said, I'm just starting to write, give me advice. I wouldn't say, you don't have to write very much. Never finish things. Don't worry about ever actually finishing a short story or a novel or anything, because even if you leave it half finished, elves will always come in the night and finish it for you. I wouldn't say. I would say, remember that whatever you do, every word you put down in a first draft is the most important thing you can possibly do. And it's absolutely okay if you freeze up, because you have to keep in mind how important it is. And everybody in the world is always going to see your first draft. That's what I wouldn't say.
That's what I wouldn't say. Okay. Does anybody want to ask anything? There.
There's a hand
Okay,
there.
2. We'll have 2. Okay. Just. Which one
Who is
his
my favorite of
character?
all of my characters? Oh, that's such a hard question. I think in Sandman, it's okay. He said it, and
Yeah.
and-
Ya està fet. Hi
okay,
havia una altra per allà
say it
darrere.
again. Say it in Spanish.
No, en espanyol, o castellà o en català, que vulguis.
¿Cuál es tu personaje favorito de todas tus obras?
What a good question. I could probably point at different things. My favorite character in Sandman was probably Merv Pumpkinhead. Just because he was the only character who I could speak through sometimes. If I was going, is this getting a bit silly? I can have Merv Pumpkinhead going, is this getting a bit silly? It was great. And I loved Delirium because she did her own dialogue. I only ever had to give her a straight line and listen. My favorite character recently is probably Letty Hempstock in The Ocean at the End of the Lane. I loved writing her, and I loved old Mrs. Hempstock too. Both of them. You know, Letty Hempstock, just as I wrote her, I just liked her more and more. Because she really tries hard, and she's good, and she's solid. And she's much more fun in some ways to write than old Mrs. Hempstock, because old Mrs. Hempstock is actually always right. Everything she says, everything that goes wrong in the book is because nobody listens to her. She's always right, which must be really, really irritating if you're around her. And anybody else who's my favorite character? Oh. You know, I would probably, just as a weird little note, I love the Marquis de Carabas in Neverwhere. And recently, I wrote a short story, which is my first Neverwhere fiction in 17 years. And it's a story called How the Marquis Got His Coat Back. And it's going to be published, I think, this month in an anthology in the US called Rogues, which is edited by George R.R. Martin. And I loved writing it. It's like a new Neverwhere adventure, and you get to learn more about the Marquis and why he is who he is. And that actually all came out of this. It all came out of the radio show because I listened. They sent me the audio files, and I sat there for 6 hours listening to the whole of the BBC show, and it finished. I thought, this is so great. There should be more of this. And then I thought, oh yeah, hang on, that's me. So I wrote another story.
We have, whoa.
I don't know, lady with the green hair? That's somebody that there's not enough of them that we get that one wrong. Working together on small things that can be done quickly. What we never ever want to happen is to actually work on a big real thing together, because what we both love is coming home and getting into bed and going, you wouldn't believe the idiot I'm working with. And the idea that if we decided to do a musical together or a novel together or co-write a whole album or something like that, by the end of it, we'd be divorced. It would be terrible. So I like things the way they are. I like the fact that when I get back to America, I'm going to help her with her book. She's been working on a book, and she's pretty much finished writing it, only because she's Amanda, the book is meant to be about 60,000 words long, and she's now written 150,000 words. So my job is she's just going to give it to me, and I will just try and cut out about 90,000 words from her manuscript, which I will probably just do by pulling out 2 out of every 3 pages. And then we're going to Michael Chabon's daughter's bat mitzvah, and we've decided to write a ukulele song for little Rosie Chabon together. So that's what we're going to be doing, and that's going to have to be performed on the Saturday, which means we're going to have to write it on the Friday, because that's how we work. But it will get written, and it will be fun. But we love doing stuff together. We love making stuff together. We love things like doing the evening with Neil and Amanda, where we just took a bunch of theaters and got up and I read stories and she sang songs. And then just to confuse people, every now and then she'd read something and I'd sing something. And that was fun, but it was fun because it was small and silly and easy. Actually building something together, I think what I really like building with Amanda is the marriage and is the relationship, and I would hate to do anything that could make that wobbly, and so would she.
Thank you.
One more?
It's up to you. You are queen. This desperation, I've never...
just for the show, please give it to her.
It's coming to you. Yeah.
Voy a atravesar un infierno
Si te oyes,
de
hablas
vergüenza.
bajito.
¿Vale?
Habla bajito.
Yo no te voy a preguntar nada para no torturarte más, pero llevo 2 semanas y media sin dormir y por eso esto que estás viendo, y te he hecho una cosa con todo mi cariño y lo siento.
Si no tienes una pregunta, déjale que le haga otro, por favor,
Lo
la
siento,
pregunta.
sí, perdón, pero puedo... No te vayas sin
luego,
que te dé todo esto.
Luego no se va sin verlo, no te preocupes. ¿Quién más tenía una pregunta? Por allí, pásaselo, por favor, a ellos.
Hola.
Gracias.
Hi. How it's to work with Terry Pratchett?
So, do you want to repeat the question for anybody out there who didn't know?
¿Cómo es trabajar con Terry Pratchett?
So, an interviewer today asked me, he said, you wrote a book with Terry Pratchett. And Terry Pratchett is the best-selling fantasy author in the world. What was it like as a young writer to work with the best-selling fantasy writer in the world? And I had to go, he wasn't the best-selling fantasy writer in the world when we worked together. And I wasn't Neil Gaiman when we worked together. I was this guy and he was this guy and we were friends. I'd written the beginning of something and I sent it to a few of my friends to read, and Terry read it and he phoned me up and he said, about a year later, and he said, that thing, are you doing anything with that? And I said, no, I'm busy, I'm writing Sandman now. And he said, well, I know what happens next. I could buy the idea off you, or we could write it together. And I thought, this is a lot like having Michelangelo say, I've got a big lump of marble here. Do you want to come down and just do it together, or I can just work on it myself? You go, no, you work on it with Michelangelo. So it was, in many ways, writing Good Omens with Terry Pratchett was like doing an apprenticeship with a master craftsman. I would write things, and Terry would go, if you just lose that line, it will be 7% funnier. How we wrote it, at the time I was writing Sandman and books of magic, but I was very nocturnal. And at 3 o'clock in the morning, whatever else I was meant to be working on, I would write 300, 400 words of good omens. And then I'd go to bed, and I'd wake up around 12 o'clock, 1 o'clock in the afternoon, and the little red light would be flashing on the answering machine, the old-fashioned kind of answering machine with the proper tape. And I would press the button, and the tape would go back, and Terry's voice would say,
Not that,
perfect
hopefully.
timing. Not that. Terry's voice would say, get up, you lazy bastard, I've just written a good bit.
Much better.
And I would phone him up, and he would read me what he'd written that morning, and I would read him what I'd written much, much earlier that morning. And then we would make each other laugh. And we'd talk about the plot, what was going to happen next. And then we would write in a mad dash to get to the next good bit before the other one could. And at the end, we put it all together and discovered. Actually, we didn't discover until the American edition that we'd created a week with 2 Wednesdays in it. But we put it together, and and what was funny, actually, I told this story for the first time to the interviewer, who was going, well, Terry Pratchett, great fantasy writer. I said, no, he wasn't. In fact, it was the first time a Terry book, had gone out to auction. And actually, publishers were able to bid on the book. And Terry was very, very uncomfortable with this because he'd never got much money for a book before, and he was terrified that if it sold for too much money, he'd get into trouble. This is a man who now goes down to his publisher with a wheelbarrow to collect, his advance in gold. But back then, I just remember when the bidding for the book got over £100,000, Terry phoning me up and saying, we have to stop this. Let's just give it back. I'll never work again. And I'm going, we are taking this money. I wrote half of these words, and they are worth that. He's like, I hope you know what you're doing. So anyway, I somehow did know what I was doing. And after that, Terry started getting lots of money for his books. So he was actually very pleased that we'd had the auction. But he was wonderful. Right now, it's really, really hard. This is my friend. Terry's been my friend since 1985. And he's going through Alzheimer's. He's going through a rear brain Alzheimer's, which means that if he were to look at this table, he might not be able to see these water or the book. So he might just kick the table away because he wouldn't be able to perceive it at all. But he is still... Can I tell one more story? Okay.
Go ahead.
Okay, so I got a phone call from Terry about 4 months ago. And I'm being driven through London, and the phone rings, and it's Terry. And he says, Neil, I'm working on my memoirs, working on my biography, because I think I have to write it. He said, and I'm having trouble remembering something, and I was hoping that you would be able to remember it. And I'm going, okay. This is my friend. He has Alzheimer's. His memory is starting to go. And I'm like, Terry, whatever you want, I will remember this for you. He said, okay. You remember in 1990, we were on the Good Omens book signing tour. We were in New York. And we went and did that radio interview with that ABC radio affiliate, where the interviewer hadn't looked at the book and thought that Good Omens was a real book of prophecy by somebody named Agnes Nutter. And you and I started winding him up about it and telling him that she really had existed, and he was amazed that, you know, a 17th century witch had said, do not buy Betamax as her prediction for 1972, and we could see the engineers behind the glass, lying on the floor, kicking at because they knew, and their boss was making an idiot of himself. And after it was all over, we walked out onto the street, and we just started singing They Might Be Giants song, Shoehorn with Teeth, together, because it was just so ridiculous. And I'm like, yeah. And he says, was that 32nd Avenue or 34th Avenue? I don't fucking know. You've got Alzheimer's. I remember it was in New York. Do not give me this shit. So that was my...
That's
so
Terry. It's fine.
He's doing very well for somebody with Alzheimer's. But having said that, we are all of his friends, very, very aware that his time is limited, and he is walking step by step into the dark.
Well, you're lucky you enjoyed him, though.
I am. And we have his books.
Exactly. So thank you very much, Neil, for being with us tonight. You're going to give me your hand now? It's a handshake?
It's a handshake.
Come on.
Oh, okay.
You can go out.
Thank you. Thank you very much, everybody. Thank her. Beautiful job.